Hello viewers and welcome to another card review video in the Lord of the Rings The Card Game Progression series. My name is Mitch.
And I'm Matthew.
And today, let us assess the player cards contained in the 5th and penultimate adventure pack of the Shadows of Mirkwood cycle, the Dead Marshes. At this point, each of our 4 spheres of influence has received a new hero, but Matthew, please introduce us to another compelling new character for tactics.
All right, so we have the hero version of Boromir. He is Gondor, noble warrior. He has an 11 threat cost, 1 willpower, 3 attack, 2 defense strength, and 5 hit points. He has 2 separate actions. The first reads, raise your threat by 1 to ready Boromir. And his second action is, discard Boromir to deal 2 damage to each enemy engaged with a single player. Well, right off the bat, let me say, as much as I'm an aficionado of tactics, this is actually a hero I've never used. And I know that that's kind of shocking, because in many ways, I think some folks rank him up there in probably top 3, top 5 most powerful tactics heroes. So right off the bat, the action advantage, it's so key. We've seen, in our progression series playthroughs, and I think just most players of the game realize how powerful and wonderful unexpected courage is, and that's for free once you get him up. And this is sort of like a built-in unexpected courage that simply costs 1 resource or 1 threat. So you can ready him to your heart's content as often as you like. Now, granted, your threat could start to skyrocket, and tactics at this point doesn't have an easy way to reduce it. So it would be nice if there was a spirit player playing Galadrim's Greeting on you, or perhaps Gandalf, or you include spirit in your deck, but just from the perspective of action advantage, he's, doesn't quest all that well, but he could quest, he could attack, he could defend, he could attack multiple times. Really is a good hero that it's, even surprising to myself that I've not used him.
Yeah, well, I must confess, I'm finding myself a little bit taken aback by it right now, but there's nothing that Boromir can't really do. He's not the world's best quester, but he hits just as hard as Legolas, he hits harder than an unmodified Gimli, and he swings just as capably as does Aragorn. He's a great defender, he's got a huge pool of hit points, and just like you said, so long as threat isn't an issue, you can just ready him time and time again to your heart's content. Neither you or myself care about score. I suggest that viewers out there don't care about score either, so whether you end the game with 25 threat or 49 threat, so long as you don't hit 50, in so far as I'm concerned, you're just fine. So I just view threat as kind of a commodity or resource to spend, and the earlier you can kind of establish yourself against the encounter deck, the better. And if you need to expend a few points of threat in order to block a few enemies or kill a few enemies, Boromir is an absolutely fantastic candidate to make sure that you do. Kind of become powerful enough that the encounter deck can't really hope to best you. There's not too much to be said about his traits, and I think perhaps the most remarkable thing about Boromir at this point is just his potential. He's yet to actually become realized, to become this incredible hero that he has the potential to someday blossom into, just because he's so held back by needing to rely on other card effects. And at the moment, those traits don't really lend themselves to making a super powerful character. Dwarven Axe boosts his attack to 4, whereas it gives 2 attack strength to Gimli. He's not Sylvan or Noldor, and eventually we see attachments that help make that kind of character much stronger, but it's not for quite some time that we actually see something that can transform Boromir into some incredible powerhouse. So I haven't had a ton of experience with him myself. He definitely came into his own kind of long after I'd left the LOTR community, but I'm back now, and I certainly look forward to what ends up being done between you and I with this character. But what do you think about his other action, Matthew, that discard to deal direct damage?
Right. When you first said his other, I was like, wait, he has another one? Yeah, he does. And it's one that doesn't get used very often, I don't think. But it's super cool and super thematic. Particularly in the next cycle, Cause of Doom, when there are lots of 2-hit point goblins and orcs and stuff that you have to fight. This could really come in handy if one player happens to get swarmed and you just don't have a way to deal with it. So I think it's more there for a thematic reason, and I think it's cool from that perspective. As far as the practicality of gameplay, I don't know if it is all that practical, quite frankly. Unfortunately, cards like Landreval do not work with Boromir, and that's probably a play that gets overlooked because they both came out in the same cycle, but Boromir's action is discard him. Landreval says destroyed, and I believe we've talked about this before, but destroyed means when they take damage equal to their hit points, and that's the only way that a character is destroyed, unless some other card effect specifically says that. So it's a shame that you can't pitch him and then have him come back to life with Landreval. I suppose it'd be a little bit powerful, though. So there's other ways, right? He gets, Fortune or Fate, for example, but I think it's cool. I think it's fun, but it's certainly not one I'd want to rely on, but rather it's a last-ditch effort.
Yeah, certainly when I sit down to build a deck, I don't necessarily consider that my heroes are for sure going to be leaving play, so maybe it's a nice little last-ditch effort right before a player ends up being destroyed by the encounter deck. Maybe their final send-off or their last farewell involves sacrificing Boromir to maybe take down some enemies with them, and for that reason, if you can combine that with the likes of other direct damage sources, Thalin, Gondorian Spearman, Descendant of Thorondor, whatever it happens to be, it's certainly a very powerful effect, but it's kind of a, if you have to rely on that, you're probably not faring terribly well. But if a player is about to leave the game, maybe it does set up your allies reasonably well to kind of adjust to taking on the encounter deck themselves. I will say Boromir as is doesn't necessarily blow me away just because he's going to need effects like Doudna Dayne Mark to become pretty powerful, and he's just kind of up against some steep competition at this point. Gimli can hit like an absolute truck, Legolas can generate progress tokens, and even though Boromir does have astounding potential, it's just not quite yet made manifest. So, if you're up against an encounter deck and you're facing effects like Caught in a Web or King Spider, certainly his first action is a very easy way to counter those exhaust a character style effects or effects that prevent you from readying characters. And if, threat management is an issue, just bear in mind that Sneak Attack and Born Aloft can both let you get as many uses out of Gandalf as possible. But considering he costs 11 threat to start off with, if you're playing tactics, that's definitely a lot of threat to consider. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him take a little while before he makes routine appearances in the progression series, but certainly eventually he's going to be, I'm sure, an absolute go-to. But, Matthew, what else is contained in this adventure pack?
Our first leadership card is an ally, Doudna Dayne Watcher. She costs 3, 1 willpower, 1 attack, 1 defense strength, and 2 hit points. Response: discard Doudna Dayne Watcher from play to cancel the shadow effects of a card just triggered. I like this card. I think the art's kind of interesting, a little mysterious here. The cost is a bit much, but she's sort of well-rounded. If you need to quest, she can quest. You need to attack, she can do that. The response, she doesn't have to be exhausted to trigger it, like we talked about in our last card review with the Rittermark's Finest, so I like that. There aren't a whole lot of ways to cancel shadows in the game, and this is one way that you can have it there doing other things if you need it, as opposed to just sitting in your hand for Lord knows how long with Hasty Stroke. So I like cards like this. I do think it's a bit of a shame she costs 3, but in many senses, I think leadership allies have their costs artificially inflated because of the presence of Steward of Gondor. So, I think she's really good. I think she can sort of sit around and just quest, attack, defend, maybe soak up 1 point of damage or something. And if you need to cancel a shadow in an emergency, even if she's exhausted, you still can do so.
Yeah, I kind of view this as another one of those cards that isn't exactly a staple for me, but if I'm really in want of some shadow cancellation other than Hasty Stroke, this is kind of the only option at this point. And it's not as if LOTR LCG ever sees a huge variety of shadow cancellation effects, so the Dunedain Watcher is always going to be of at least some use. The stats are, for the most part, unremarkable. For one more resource than Guard of the Citadel. She's got one additional stat point, so that's not particularly crazy. There's no Dunedain synergy, but leadership normally does have resources to spare. If you're in a big multiplayer game and you're running a lot of leadership cards, maybe you've got Theodred and Glowin and Steward of Gondor, and that equates to a lot of resources. And if you're able to take some pressure off of your spirit companions so that they don't have to totally be responsible for canceling every shadow effect, I'm sure they'll appreciate it. And if you're canceling Hummer Horns, if you're canceling the shadow effect of exhaustion in A Journey to Rosgobel, there's just so much nasty stuff out there that you can kind of deal with and accommodate for if you've got some other cancellation options. So if you discard her, you could ready Prince Imrahil, and that's always worth considering. But apart from that, I don't really have too much to say. She's expensive, but she certainly offers up something very unique, and she kind of stays special for a very long time. So by no means a go-to ally for me, but if there was anything I'd say about this card, just like you, it's a hell of a lot more proactive than a reactive card like the albeit much less expensive Hasty Stroke.
Yeah, the Dunedain trait does get fleshed out much later in the card game's life cycle here. I will say she doesn't really fit in with their theme, which is predominantly having multiple enemies engaged with you, although I suppose you could say that she fits into that because you want a bunch of enemies engaged and she could handle at least one of the shadows. I can think of a quest or two where you definitely want to have as much shadow cancellation as possible. Oh, you know, perhaps like the one quest we played where we didn't cancel a shadow and I lost a bunch of my heroes. So, you know, against the infamous Smog the Dragon. So,
well, to be precise, Matthew, we revealed a card that did have a shadow effect. So in that case,
that's true.
Cancellation was not enough.
Yeah.
But
either way, I still haven't gotten over it, and maybe I would have felt better if she was in play.
Yeah, and speaking of dragons, not to spoil an upcoming scenario quite a while from now, but sometimes if you've got a big nasty enemy that poses the threat of launching an additional attack or a couple additional attacks, you're definitely going to want to cancel shadow effects. And certainly once we get into the Dwaro-Delph cycle, there are some horrendous shadow effects that I would very much like to prevent. But we've got another Dunedain card up next, so let's talk about it.
It is the item Dunedain Cache. It costs 2. It attaches to a hero. The attached hero gains ranged. Action, pay 1 resource from attached hero's pool to attach Dunedain Cache to another hero. I really like this card. Again, it's probably multiplayer only for the most part, except for those few enemies where you want range because you can only attack or defend them if you have a ranged character. But this is a great way to get a big beefy attacker, let's say like Gimli, who can't snipe across the table to otherwise do so. There are very few cards that grant range, and a lot of them are trait specific. So it's, you know, a Sylvan attachment or a this or that attachment. So it's a really good card, I think, in those situations where you know you're going to have a beefy attacker, but you might not necessarily want to pull down enemies to your side. Someone else can handle that more readily or something. So I like it. It's not for every deck, but it is certainly nice to have around. I've included it many times.
This is a very interesting card. So it's the first time that we see a Dunedain attachment that doesn't have the signal trait, which you're more familiar with the modern card pool than I, but I think at some point that does become kind of significant. It's pretty expensive, but it does fill a very niche role. Grandson of Bane and Legolas have the printed ranged keyword, but apart from that, it's only really inhabiting expensive allies like Horseback Archer, Silverload Archer. Both of those cost 3. Insofar as candidates that you might want to affix this to, you mentioned Gimli to smash big enemies wherever they happen to go. Boromir, of course, that came out in this adventure pack, he could potentially declare an attack against every enemy in play. And Prince Imrahil, he might work okay with this just because so soon as an ally leaves play, he's ready, and therefore he's very likely to be able to attack. And of course, any character upon which you would hear unexpected courage or a lore attachment we'll cover a little bit later on. Really any kind of readying effect goes perfectly with this one. What's very interesting about this card is just how exactly ranged is structured. And over the entire lifespan of Lord of the Rings, the card game, they have changed how exactly it works in regard to one character attacking or participating in attacks against the same enemy during the same game round. So to read a little bit out of the rulebook, it just states, when a player is the active attacker during the combat phase, the game rules grant him the option to declare one attack against each enemy with which he is engaged. The ranged keyword allows a character to declare attacks against enemies engaged with other players, but it also allows them to participate in attacks against enemies engaged with other players. And declaring an attack and participating in an attack are two separate things. So, to read from our FAQ, characters are not limited as to how many times they can participate in attacks against the same enemy, provided that each attack can be legally declared and the character is ready and eligible to be declared as an attacker. So that was kind of complicated, but as an example, let's say Matthew is the first player and he controls Gimli. So Matthew has Gimli attack a Nazgul of Dol Guldur engaged with another player because of a Dunedain cache. So Gimli declares one attack against an enemy he's eligible to attack. Gimli does not destroy the Nazgul engaged with me, and unexpected courage allows for the readying of Gimli. When it comes time to be my turn, and I have maybe some, 1 or 0 attack strength ally as my sole available character, when I have that declare an attack against the Nazgul of Dol Guldur, Gimli is not limited in regard to how many attacks he can participate in. So Matthew declared an attack, and he's able to participate in an attack that I declared. And because Gimli especially is likely to have very high attack values, ever so often you can kind of cheese that ranged keyword to really milk as much value as possible out of your heroes and characters. So that's kind of an awful lot to say, but just bear that in mind for if you're playing Brand, if you're playing Legolas, if you're playing the Dunedain cache. Ranged is a deceptively powerful keyword. So I don't know if we're going to be often playing this card. During our 6th adventure pack of the Shadows of Mirkwood cycle, there's a very dangerous enemy that actually changes which player it's engaged with. So if you've got ranged characters and you can kind of attack that enemy wherever it happens to go, that's just an awesome little puzzle piece afforded to potentially solving the scenario of Adventure Pack 6. But I feel like I've said quite a lot, so Matthew, anything else to say, or shall we move on to tactics?
No, the only thing I'll note is I don't think I even understood how ranged worked for quite a while, and probably missed a lot of attacks I could have otherwise made. So yeah, it's a great card. Yeah, I agree it's a little bit expensive, but I think it's really a nice way to spread some damage across the table.
Sure.
Up next, we move on to our tactics player cards. We have an ally up front, and that is Vassal of the Windlord. It is a 1-cost eagle creature ally, and it has 0 willpower, 3 attack strength, 0 defense strength, and 1 measly hit point. The Vassal is ranged and cannot have restricted attachments. Forced. After an attack in which Vassal of the Windlord attacked resolves, discard Vassal of the Windlord from play. Well, we get another eagle, and I love the eagles, and this one is super cheap. So definitely would help some of those earlier quests where you needed a creature or ranged or what have you to deal with certain enemies or treacheries. Having ranged is nice. 3 attack is fantastic. The only drawback is you lose him after he attacks, but because this Vassal is so cheap, you often don't mind it for that extra oomph that you need to get through some high defense enemies.
Yeah, Vassal of the Windlord is nuts. 1 resource for 3 attack is fantastic. Like you said, it's a bummer that he only hangs around for a limited period of time, but even as a ephemeral card, it just really packs a wallop for the price you're investing in it. It's not terribly often that you need to hit one enemy like a truck, and even if you've only got a Vassal of the Windlord or 2 to use a single time, if you're able to destroy your Hill Troll or your Nazgul or your Dragon, whatever it happens to be, that might really be the only thing that you need them for. They're ranged, and even though they can't do that multiple attack thing, they work great with Legolas. They ensure that Brand is going to be able to destroy an enemy to ready a character, and if you've got a spirit player playing with you, maybe they're running stand and fight just to invest a single resource to bring back a Vassal of the Windlord. Especially at this point in our card pool, I just really cannot get over just how effective these are for the price that you pay. Veteran Axe Hand is 2 attack strength for 2, and granted, you can use it time and time again, but this is cheaper and it hits harder. It's a chump blocker, so maybe you pay a resource for Feint, maybe you had paid 2 resources for a Winged Guardian, and then you didn't have enough, additional resources to save it from being discarded after blocking, so you just allow your Vassal of the Windlord to die, Snowborn Scout style. Worth noting is, again, last adventure pack we talked about Meneldor's Flight, that as an action lets you return eagles to hand. Forced effects always take place prior to actions, so you can't attack with the Vassal and then return it to hand and still have that attack resolve, and the same thing goes with Borne Aloft. So, this is a pretty compelling card. It works great with Prince Imrahil, it's fantastic with ranged characters, and if you're playing Radagast, it doesn't take hardly any time at all before he's able to accrue 1 resource that you can invest into this character. And not to kind of hog the microphone here, but I'll just mention that as yet another Eagle, if you're playing The Eagles Are Coming, you can now have a grand total of 15 Eagle trait cards in your deck. And that means when you play The Eagles Are Coming for 0, and you search the top 5 cards of your deck for any number of Eagle cards to add to your hand, on average, if you've got all 15 Eagles in your deck, The Eagles Are Coming is going to draw 1.43 cards, which means that it's very much worth using. So, this is a fantastic character. I guarantee it's going to be a staple for the progression series, and even though I may not play this one often myself, I certainly look forward to it being put out onto the tabletop by Matthew.
The final tactics card is the Song attachment, Song of Mocking. It costs 1, it has to attach to a hero, and action. Exhaust Song of Mocking to choose another hero. Until the end of the phase, attached hero takes all damage assigned to the chosen hero. Well, this pretty much sucks. I don't know if it sucks so much. I've never used it. I've never seen anyone use it. This could be cool on someone like Glowin to, get more resources when he's, can only take 1 defense or something, or you don't want to risk an undefended attack or something. I've never seen anyone actually try that combo. I'm sure someone has, and maybe it works, but I'm not a big fan of the Song cards in general. I'm not sure if it's because I hate those part of the book. I always skip over them and never read them. Blasphemy, I know. But so maybe I've just got this mental block to like almost all of the song cards. But whereas other players I know love them for some reason and want to make song decks, which are becoming more and more viable as we get more and more of them. I suppose in a pinch this could be great. If you've got a fragile hero that you want damage on, or some hero that you don't want damage on, but it just seems like a weird contingency where you could just put in a chump blocker or something, or boost their defense in some way. I just find it odd outside of glowing and wanting damage on him. So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I certainly think this is not a card meant for every deck, and now that you're done mocking this card, Matthew, why don't I try and see if I can give it a fair shake. So I think the biggest thing to keep in mind for this one is that you definitely have to plan ahead, because you kind of want to build your deck around including a card like this. So maybe you want a lot of damage on Gimli, maybe you want a lot of damage on Glowin, whether to attack really hard or gain a bunch of resources. Or, like you said, maybe you've got a lot of fragile characters that you would like to protect. So, you can use this at any phase, and you want to use it at the beginning of the phase. So, you play Song of Mocking on one of your high hit point heroes. You exhaust it, and you choose another hero. So, let's say you and I are playing a Journey to Rosgobel. Eowyn already has 1 or 2 points of damage on her. We're afraid that we might reveal the Necromancer's Reach or Exhaustion. We're fresh out of Cancel When Revealed effects, so if we pull either of those cards, Eowyn is dead meat. She's not going to be able to contribute her willpower to clearing the active location, progressing through the quest, whatever. She's in danger of death, and Song of Mocking could protect her. So until the end of the phase, the attached hero takes all damage assigned to the chosen hero. So this is good, in a sense, during the quest phase. So you use it, then you stage. You just have to make sure that you use it in advance, because you're not normally allowed action windows during staging. So if you forget to use it, at that point it's too late. And if the hero you want to target with this effect changes from round to round, that's great. And if you want to use this kind of effect during different phases, you could also play multiple copies, but during combat, this is a little bit less appealing, because when you have a hero take all damage assigned to a chosen hero, if you've got like a really high defense value hero that is the holder of the Song of Mocking, any damage that comes in directly bypasses defense completely. So I could see maybe fixing this to the lore hero Glorfindel, who's got 5 HP, but he's only got 1 defense. Denethor is 3 defense and 3 hit points, so maybe if he gets a shadow card and he takes more damage than is survivable, Song of Mocking could save him in that case, but you've got to plan ahead. If you reveal a shadow card that adds to the enemy's attack strength, then maybe Denethor won't be destroyed, because you do have an action window to respond. But if you instead reveal a shadow card like one of the wolves of our first print-on-demand expansion, if that character takes damage immediately before you trigger Song of Mocking, then your hero is dead meat. So definitely be aware of instant damage. This is almost like the Sentinel keyword. It just doesn't exactly make use of defense. So it's certainly a very interesting card. It can do a lot, and the Rivendell Minstrel can fetch it like it can any song. So I don't know. I'm certainly one of those players that's experimented with this one. You can use Glorfindel or Glowin and combine it with Citadel Plate. In a sense, it can allow Citadel Plate or Self-Preservation to do double duty. So just like, Self-Preservation attaches to a character and it only heals that character, if you're preventing other characters from taking damage, it kind of works out to self-preservation is effectively healing them, if you can kind of wrap your mind around that one. So I don't know. I've tried to sell this card. It's certainly not something I'm going to be using a lot, but it allows you to kind of focus all of your damage onto just one hero, and if you're running Lore of Imladris to heal all damage, you know, if all is 9, that's just more efficient than if all is 3. So I've kind of run out of things to say here. This card, you know, I'm trying really hard to convince people that it's worthwhile. Please let me know in the comments if you think Song of Mocking is indeed worthwhile. I just think that the card pool that I remember may as well have not included Song of Mocking at all.
All right. Spirit cards. Up next, Ally, Elfhelm. Costs 4. 1 willpower, 2 attack, 2 defense strength, and 3 hit points. Elfhelm is unique and is also Rohan and Warrior. And while Elfhelm is ready, he gains response. After your threat is raised as the result of questing unsuccessfully or by an encounter or quest card effect, reduce your threat by 1. I really like this card. It is currently in my Rohan deck, although only a 1 of. Typically, you don't quest with this character. You leave him ready in case you get, you know, a doomed card or something else that might raise your threat. You get to reduce it by 1. And then he can attack or defend pretty successfully. 2 attack isn't that bad. 2 defense is pretty good, combined with his pool of 3 hit points. So, yeah, I mean, it's a bit expensive, but I think it's a good card that can serve sort of 2 purposes, right? It's sort of a way to offset the doomed, like I said, or some other threat-raising ability. And he's no slouch in attacking or defending, and Tactics is usually looking for characters that can do one of those 2 things successfully.
Totally. All of my experiences being a solo player have involved the spirit and or lore spheres for the most part. And it may seem a little bit silly, but 2 attack strength is a really big deal if you're playing a spirit deck. So he attacks reasonably hard. Just like you said, even though he's a Rohan character, he's generally not questing. Although worth mentioning is that if you've got Eomund, if Eomund leaves play, then Elfhelm is one of those characters that can be readied. And I think in some ways, Elfhelm is almost better in a solo environment than multiplayer because, you know, it's great if you're able to negate all of these activations of a doomed 1 keyword on encounter cards, but all of the other players are going to continue to stomach all of those deleterious effects. Also, if you're a solo player and you're going to quest unsuccessfully by 1 and increase your threat by 1, maybe if it's just you decide that that's perfectly fine, whereas if you've got other players with you, they do have to increase their threat. So, in a sense, maybe that just allows you to save your threat reduction cards for use on other players as opposed to yourself. But, no matter what the case may be, Elfhelm is just an all-around pretty cool character. He's certainly not great for questing, and it's interesting that he has stats identical to a Northern Tracker, and he costs the same amount. Normally, when you have the unique restriction associated with a character, they do get a little stat bump. That isn't the case for Elfhelm, but I mean, he's still a very cool card. Mustering the Rohirrim, if you run that, he's certainly one that's probably worth digging for, and depending on the scenario, the amount of threat that you can negate through this 1 card is very impressive indeed. So, I like him quite a lot. At the rate that you and I draw cards so far during the progression series, I'm sure you'll be seeing at least 1 or 2 copies in a lot of the spirit decks that Matthew and I run, so I like this character. It doesn't totally blow me away, but it's just another compelling, unique character and a potent source of combat capability located in the spirit sphere.
And that brings us to another expensive spirit card for this pack. It is the 5-cost event, We Do Not Sleep. Action. Until the end of the phase, Rohan characters do not exhaust to commit to quests. Well, that certainly would be nice for Helm to throw in his 1, because you otherwise want him ready, but this is a very expensive event, and you'd have to ask yourself, why do I want my Rohan characters to not exhaust to commit to the quest? A good chunk of them, in fact, I'd even go so far as to say most of them, don't really have respectable attack or defense strength. Eowyn, for example, 1 and 1 and 3 hit points. You don't really want to attack or defend with her, and that's the case for a lot of the Rohan allies. So, while I certainly recognize the power of not exhausting to quest in a generic sort of abstracted sense, in terms of Rohan characters specifically, I'm just not sure the 5-cost is worth it to have a bunch of weenies sitting around to not attack for much or die defending. So, could this card become more worthwhile later when Rohan gets a wider variety of characters? Yes, although I will say that this is a card that just never makes the cut for my Rohan decks.
Yeah, it's very difficult to justify. What are you seeking to accomplish in not exhausting these characters? Are you worried about the Necromancer's Reach, killing off your characters en masse? Like you said, at this point, the Rohan characters aren't really capable when it comes to attacking or defending. Gleowine attacks for 0, Escort from Idaros attacks for 0, Snowborn Scout attacks and quests for 0. Dune here can attack for 2 or 3. The Horseback Archer can attack for 2, and I think it quests for 0, so it just seems like this is a card that was developed for something that Rohan is not. So it's certainly something to keep an eye on, but 5 resources in Spirit may as well be 20. Grim Resolve for leadership is way more inclusive, and it's in a sphere that is more able to conjure up a huge number of resources. That, for the same cost, allows you to just ready all of your characters, and whether you're not exhausting them in the first place, or you're exhausting them and then immediately readying them, either way, you're accomplishing the same exact thing. And just, it lets you do so much more. Like, maybe you've got a bunch of kind of crappy combat characters that are ready to not really do a whole lot, whereas Grim Resolve allows you to commit all your characters to the quest, or use a bunch of beneficial abilities like Gildor and Glorien, kind of mixing around the cards off the top of your deck, and then you can ready him to commit to the quest, or attack or defend. The options are basically limitless, and the options are very limited for We Do Not Sleep. So every time we get another Rohan character, just like mustering the Rohirrim, I'll certainly think back to We Do Not Sleep, but Nor Am I a Stranger, the attachment that allows you to give the Rohan trait to any hero. You know, this kind of effect doesn't build enough of a case to run a card like Nor Am I a Stranger, which, one way or another, all of that equates to Rohan still isn't powerful enough, and those cards, you know, 2 D grade cards coming together doesn't necessarily make an A or S rank card. So I think this one is totally skippable for a long time to come. Sounds like you don't seem overly fond of it yourself, and of course you're much more familiar with a much broader card pool than I am. So not a fan of We Do Not Sleep, but again, be sure to share your own experiences in the comments, just because Matthew and I would love to be convinced otherwise about any of these cards. The better Matthew and I get at LOTR LCG, the more he and I can consider, the more likely the progression series is to succeed, and that's definitely not a bad thing. So not a big fan of this one, but I guess maybe lore will fare a bit better.
We'll see. So up first is an ally. Cost 3. It is the Sylvan Tracker. 1 willpower, 1 attack, 1 defense strength, 3 hit points. The Sylvan Tracker is, of course, Sylvan. Response. After a Sylvan character readies during the refresh phase, heal 1 damage from that character. A little expensive, like most lore allies seem to be, but decent stats. Could do anything moderately well, and 3 hit points is nothing to sneeze at. I like the ability. It could even heal itself, so if you need to take some smaller enemies maybe and constantly heal, the Sylvan Tracker, there's a few Sylvan heroes, Legolas being one of them, although you're probably not putting a lot of damage on Legolas. I think it's a good card that only gets better and better once the Sylvan trait is fleshed out many, many cycles down the road. So in the short term, with such a limited card pool, you'd really have to ask yourself, okay, well, what other Sylvans do I have in my deck? Do I expect them to be taking damage with any sort of regularity that I would need to heal Sylvans and only Sylvans? I think for the most part, that answer is no with the current Sylvans we have available. But what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts, and I'm sure this is no secret, but I'm not a huge fan of healing in the core set and Shadows of Mirkwood. It just seems like it's not that often that you need to strip damage tokens off of characters. Just like if Boromir doesn't make you hit the threat cap of 50, if you end a scenario with a bunch of characters with just 1 hit point remaining, that's totally fine. It doesn't stop you from winning. And so long as you know what to expect from the encounter deck, you're probably not going to set yourself up into situations where your characters are likely to die. Like I mentioned earlier, if I've got Eowyn with 2 damage tokens on her, I'm probably not going to be committing her to the quest if I know I'm at risk of the Necromancer's Reach dealing that killing blow. Maybe if I'm worried about Dol Guldur orcs coming off the top of the encounter deck, I'm also committing Snowborn Scout to the quest, just in case I pull that card and then I can have something that's kind of worthless die instead of some more worthwhile character. Eventually, we do see a mechanic that allows the encounter deck to kind of toss out a ton of damage that you can kind of pick and choose how you want to distribute among your characters. Just to be totally clear, it ends up being called archery. And in that context, Sylvan Tracker is great, but until then, it's just not quite doing enough. Damage kind of comes in spikes and spurts from the encounter deck. So whereas it would be great to take 1 or 2 points of chip damage on your Sylvan Tracker, take 1, 2, or 3 points of damage on Legolas, that may or may not be the case. Like, it's great. If you take an undefended attack, Legolas takes 2 damage, he attacks, and at the end of the round, during the refresh phase, he readies, and Sylvan Tracker pulls a point of damage off of him. More likely, Legolas, maybe Legolas takes a little bit of damage, but it's also possible that an unfortunate, untimely shadow effect means that Legolas is killed. So, at the moment, looking at our available Sylvans, Legolas has 4 HP, Lorien Guide has 2. Haldir of Lorien has 3, Sylvan Tracker has 3, but Daughter of the Nimrodel, Hinamarth Riversong, Silverlode Archer, each of those have 1 hit point, and as soon as a character is dead, then it's not going to be on the table during the refresh phase to be healed. So I like that the Sylvan Tracker's effect stacks. Multiple trackers heal the same amount of damage off of any number of Sylvan characters, and eventually this becomes a pretty compelling effect, but for the moment, for those statistics, I'm more likely to just invest in something like an Erebor Hammersmith because you're getting the same stats, but for 1 less cost. So, not amazing now, but it certainly gets much better in time.
On the flip side, our next card I think is worthwhile right off the bat, and that is the 1-cost attachment, Fast Hitch. Fast Hitch is a skill, and it has to attach to a Hobbit character. Action, exhaust Fast Hitch to ready attached character. It's pretty cheap, cheaper than Unexpected Courage. Can only go on a Hobbit, of which we don't have many. Bilbo and Frodo probably being the best targets, because as we've discussed previously, those Hobbit allies are just stinky. But, having Bilbo be able to quest and do something else, or having Frodo be able to take multiple defenses or quest and defend or something, it's probably worthwhile.
this is a card that starts out pretty good and it ends up getting really good. It is very cool that you can attach this to a character, but in slightly different words, our Hobbit allies at the moment do leave a little something to be desired. But it is cool that you can potentially have Wandering Took defend or attack for one player and then switch control to another player and then defend or attack again. But this is a cheap lore Hobbit-only version of Unexpected Courage, and probably the most interesting, best use for this card is just to trigger multiple defenses. You mentioned Frodo, but Bilbo Baggins is a natural target for a burning brand. There are a lot of players out there in the community that love to transform Bilbo Baggins into a powerhouse of a defender. So whether through Dunedain Warning and or Protector of Lorien, it's totally possible that you can turn Bilbo into a character with, I don't know, 3, 4, 7, whatever defense. And if you're discarding cards through Protector of Lorien only to boost up a character that can defend multiple times, then that's kind of doing double duty. And with a Burning Brand, if you don't have to worry about shadow effects like spoiling all your fun, that just ends up being an incredibly powerful combo. So just like Boromir, just like Prince Imrahil, this is another means of working around treacheries like Caught in a Web, exhausting effects like the enemy King Spider. So this is a pretty cool card, and because it's coming out in the Dead Marshes, I think it's worth mentioning that this is a fantastic means of getting as much willpower as possible for those escape tests. So just remember that when you are required to do an escape test, you commit however many characters to the test that you would like, and then you have an action window so you can ready that character, and then you reveal those escape cards. So this is a pretty subtle and innocuous card just because it doesn't have a lot of targets, but I believe there are a fair few Hobbit characters in The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings narrative, so over time something tells me we might be seeing many, many more characters that do possess that trait.
Well, that brings us to our final card of this adventure pack, and that is the 1-cost attachment, Song of Battle. It is a song, of course, and it must attach to a hero. Attached hero gains a tactics resource icon. Well, I'm sick of talking about these cards. There's really not much to say, except it helps you smooth your resources, in this case, in tactics. You want to include Feint or super fun Beorn in your deck? Well, this is the way to do so.
Yeah, really the only notable stuff I can think of to say is that, like with all the other resource icon conferring songs, it doesn't count as a printed icon. And for some cards, that ends up being important. Rivendell Minstrel, go figure, can fetch songs. And maybe the coolest thing about Song of Battle, not that I've ever used it for this, but if you are bound and determined to play Thicket of Spears, that core set event that costs 3 and requires you to pay for it with the resources from the pools of 3 different heroes, then this can be a way to let you fund that really prohibitive effect there. But, you know, it does negate, like, an entire player's worth of enemy attacks. So maybe that's a compelling effect, maybe not. But the way that Matthew, you and I tend to play, you run 1 or 2 tactics heroes, and sometimes tactics resources are pretty scarce. So this is another way of making sure that you have a bunch of those at your disposal. Maybe it gets you a step closer to actually playing Landroval or Beorn, or even something a little bit more realistically affordable, like a Descendant of Thorondor. So I won't exactly say that I'm blown away by this utility card, but just like all of our other songs, this one has its uses. Tactics players have waited 5 adventure packs now to get their turn at songs, and I suppose overall, Matthew, are you more of a Song of Battle kind of guy or Song of Mocking?
Well, if I had to choose one, I would choose Song of Battle, but I don't recall if I've ever used either one.
Well, we'll have to see if that ever changes. But
Yeah.
I suppose that brings another card evaluation video to a close. So, Matthew, as a way of wrapping things up, what are your overall thoughts and impressions on the new assortment of player cards found in the Dead Marshes?
Well, I think that this is a more even adventure pack than the last one, and I think each sphere gets something pretty good. Fast Hitch, I think, is a auto-include for any deck that includes a decent Hobbit hero. Elf Helm is pretty decent if you're trying to build a Rohan deck. Vassal of the Windlord is going to be clutch for a very long time. I like both of the leadership cards. I think they're both probably underused, but very valuable. And of course, the hero Boromir, while I don't remember if I've ever used him, maybe in the old Progression series, but never with the actual card, the physical copy, is certainly powerful and is a key contributor to a lot of current decks that are deemed by many to be broken and just overkill. So I think this is a welcome addition to the card pool. What are your thoughts?
Well, I'll pretty much share your sentiments. I think Boromir, when first introduced, appeared to be incredibly powerful, but he's really held back just by not having a card pool that backs him up. Gimli and Legolas are just powerful enough that Boromir, at this point, does get a little bit outclassed. But certainly, once he gets a few more instruments and options at his disposal, he does quickly develop into one of the single strongest heroes in the game. The leadership cards I'm not exactly blown away by, but they do have their niche roles that they fill. Vassal of the Windlord is fantastic, Elfhelm is alright, and Fast Hitch, of course, because we do eventually see a whole hell of a lot of hobbits once we start to break into our Lord of the Rings saga expansions. That is a pretty fantastic card. So there's a lot of really cool stuff in this pack. There are definitely some cards that take a little while before they blossom into things that are worth putting in a deck, but overall, a pretty damn decent adventure pack, and certainly Boromir warrants picking this one up all on his own. So I look forward to our scenario playthrough of the Dead Marshes to come up next. But, Matthew, let's get on out of here, so why don't you do me the honor of once again plugging your podcast?
I'd love it if each and every one of you were able to check out the podcast that I am a co-host of, the Grey Company Podcast, an in-depth Lord of the Rings LCG podcast focusing on strategy, deck building, and the metagame.
So be sure to check it out. If at any point you'd like to get in touch with me, I'm the Hive Tyrant on Facebook and Twitter. Do be sure to let Matthew and I know in the comments section below what your own thoughts, opinion, experience, and perspective is on any or all of these cards. Do you agree with us? Do you think that we were unfairly kind or critical about our hero, about any of these cards? Maybe you're a little bit more fond of Song of Mocking or We Do Not Sleep than Matthew and I were, and we certainly are open to convincing. So, if you'd like to make a donation or contribution to support the ongoing Lord of the Rings The Card Game Progression series, I have a Patreon account as well. So, I'll just leave it at saying, be sure to check back in again soon for much more LOTR LCG content to come. Take care, and thank you for listening.